Hello and welcome to another episode of Steppin through the Web API Spec. Today we're going to be discussing briefly about the background tasks API. So whenever we're dealing with web applications, performance always has to be a concept you're constantly talking about to try to make it as performant an application as possible. It's something we're constantly fighting, dealing with maybe some scenarios where internet connectivity is not the best. So we got to talk about offline or delaying things and those types of things. But the other thing that's inherently a bottleneck issue is the threading. Whereas if you are coming from a platform like in a Java world or a C sharp world where you are used to building applications where you can build multi-threaded applications, you don't have that ability in the web world. So at least not yet. So we have to deal with the main thread, which is basically the event loop. If you have ever dealt with any Node.js programming, you have worked with this event loop or the REPL, REPL, that whole event loop concept. So when we're dealing with updating an application or trying to provide something application, sometimes we can make use of a tool like the background tasks API to basically defer processing of part of the application till there's time on the event loop. Okay. So now a couple things to keep in mind is I would reserve this for things that aren't crucial to the end user. So if I'm first loading an application and there's things above the fold that I want my user to be able to do right off the bat, I probably will not have those things processed by the background tasks API. But maybe there's some things further down the page or maybe deeper in clickwise into the application that I want to have available, like if I'm getting some data and making use of, the local storage or whatever, then there's some things that I would maybe do from a background tasks API standpoint. Now, like many of these, I don't know if I've mentioned this on previous spec step and videos, but as we go through these, the reason why these are things are important to know, it's not like you're going to do these on every application. There's a lot of applications I build that I don't do the background tasks API or background fetching, or like I've talked in previous videos, those sorts of things. But it's good to have these things in your toolbox. So if you have this big toolbox of things and you need this tool to help make things more efficient, you can go and grab that tool and apply it. So a couple things. This one is not an experimental like the previous ones we've did, but they have some good tips here in the documentation about idle callbacks. So basically, what happens is the user agent in a browser, uh, if you do this background task, it's smart enough to say, okay, let's work with the event loop. When we have some time, let's run this background test. So it uses what they call an idle callback. And so you can use that along with timing out and things to make some set timeout, time remaining, all those types of things to make sure that you run this as efficiently as possible. So now a couple things is I would, if I'm working on this, I probably wouldn't make changes necessarily to the DOM. And I think it mentions it, yeah, right down here within the callback. I would also be careful doing this type of work that has a direct impact on the UI. You don't want your user doing something within the UI and all of a sudden your background task runs and then changes that UI. That's just going to be frustrating to them. So I would also do this where I can predict roughly how long it's going to take. So if I'm running like, oh, it's that one right there. If I'm doing something that it might take a while, I'm doing a promise and I'm not quite sure when that promise is going to resolve, then I would probably not do that in background tasks. Okay. Or if I do that, I may use a timeout of some sort. So I may keep track of that time. And if it hits a certain time, that at that timeout, and then I would probably do something different for the end user. Say, hey, we have, if it's a slower connection, I may say, hey, we haven't been able to do XYZ. Um, Click this button to update it when you get a chance, that sort of thing. Okay. They have an example here where they go through the idle callback method. So they have a button that you can click and update the uh, task numbers and total tasks and all that, and a progress box there for the progress element. And that's another good thing. I'm not going to deal with that too much in this video, but they have the progress element right here. And that's probably a good one to use to show that how far that background task has gone. And then they have a task, some variables there, and how they're grabbing those variables. And then you can make use of like fragments and things like that when you're doing this. And then you can enqueue tasks and make use of a queue and manage that queue of what's getting done with that. So, but without further ado, I don't want these videos to be super long. I will leave it to you to go through the documentation. Let me just jump to my quick and simple example here. So basically, I just have a button that starts a background task, and I have a div here to log out information. So I'm grabbing my button, I'm grabbing my log div, and then I just have a Boolean for a flag to track if the idle callback has been canceled or not. And then I just have this perform task function. And all I'm doing is I'm creating a text node and a break just to fill in that log in that div. And then I'm simulating a delay of 3 seconds. Feel free to change this however you want to play with it, but I'm just simulating, hey, let's start now and let's wait 3 seconds. And then as long as the end time, 3 seconds from now, as long as the now is less than the end time, it's going to keep going and append, hey, background task completed, and breaking it through. And then here I'm handling the callback. So, and I tried to comment these for you to try to help you out. But while there's time remaining in the idleness area, while it's idle, the start button is going to be disabled and idle callback's not going to be canceled. So that's going back up here to this Boolean. So while the idle callback canceled is false, and what that bang means is not true. So it's going to be true until it turns to true, and then the bang turns it to false. And so the deadline time remaining, that's here, that variable, there's a time remaining method. And then the start button is disabled, then it's going to keep performing this task right here. Okay. Then I have a listener. I put on the start button, just a simple click. I'm disabling it right away. I do that quite a bit. I would recommend if you don't do that on various forms and things. We probably have all experienced this where you're filling out a form, you click submit, you don't get any feedback, and I would always recommend feedback to the end user, but you don't get any feedback, so you click it again, you click it again, you click it again, and usually that means some bad things on the back end of the website, and it's a poor user experience. So um, I usually disable a button once they click it and we're running through. You could even put some other, I usually recommend putting some other information around that button saying, hey, we're working on this sort of thing. So it's going to pin the child background task started, put in a break. And then here is where I'm getting into the APIs. So my idle callback handle here. I'm going into the request idle callback and I'm passing through the handle idle callback right here. Okay. So then I'm doing set timeout just because I want this to run pretty quickly. And I'm setting disabled to false, setting his idle callback canceled to true, and then passing that idle callback handle to the cancel idle callback, back to it, and then seeing if the button is no longer disabled and is idle callback canceled, then I'm going to append idle callback canceled and the break. So you can imagine this is a pretty simplistic example, but what this would be is once I click it, this may be some areas where you would do this stuff in the background over here with this line right here. And you would do that stuff in the background, and then eventually that idle callback would be canceled and your background stuff's done. So let me just refresh, go back and run this real quick. And I'll show you, this is what it's going to look like when it's done. So background tasks started. If I go back, that is right here on this line 48. Once I click the button, then it's going to do the line break. Then it's going to say performing background task. And that one is up here on line 11 when it calls the perform task method, then do a line break. Then background task completed. That's here on line 19 after 3 seconds. It'll do that. And then idle callback canceled. That is down here on line 38. Once we have set the is idle callback canceled to true, and the start button is no longer disabled. So let me just refresh this and run it real quick. So it started, 3 seconds, boom, it's completed and the callback is canceled. So I would recommend looking into using something like this. Read through the documents, recommend using something like this if you are um, doing some background things that's not crucial to the initial usage of the application and that you need for future usage to make the application more performant. But I would also make sure, just like it talks about here, updating the display, make sure that when you're doing this, you're communicating with the end user kind of where things are at in the process. So if you have any questions on this, let me know, and happy stepping.